Hello again. This is Pastor Don and Carol. This is Pastor Don Phillips of Don and Carol Phillips Ministries, and I'm glad you tuned into this message today. I believe it'll be a blessing to you. I want to tell you that God has a plan for your life, and if you want to be successful in the spiritual life, I'm going to give you 5 principles for that today. I have the setting in the book of Joshua. We'll be talking about him a lot today. Let me read you the text. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I'm the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." And Joshua did so. Now we're going to talk about Joshua today, but I'm hoping to point out in that what you and I need to be doing, because Joshua learned to let God lead his way and how to follow God and God's ways in his life. And I'm of the opinion today that the path that Joshua took, one of obedience and reverence, is the way we should be following God today ourselves. Remember that the title of our message today is 5 Principles of Spiritual Success. Let's talk about spiritual principle number 1 at first. The battle is won by remembering who is in charge. Oh, how hard that is on some of us, because we know everything there is to know. We know everything about everything. Nobody can tell us anything. Well, I want to tell you something. You'll never be spiritually successful with that kind of attitude. You've got to understand who is in charge. You've got to let him be in charge of your life, your actions, the path you take. And Joshua had been assured the leadership of Israel after the death of Moses. He was the leader when they finally marched into the promised land. Do you remember that? Well, he understood then that many battles lay ahead, but he also knew that he had the promise of God to help him. Joshua gives us some of the details in the first 9 verses of chapter 1 of his writing. Let me read this to you. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, as far as the great river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life, because just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you, but be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give to them. Only the strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the will of my servant. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For when you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Now, I want you to think about a couple of things here. Now that Joshua had assumed the responsibility of leadership, he realized that the defeat of the city of Jericho was the next great task at hand. He'd already sent 2 spies into the city to gather information for the coming attack. But after receiving the report from the spies, readying the troops and crossing the Jordan, Joshua sought to ready himself. He evidently went out to survey the landscape, perhaps devise a battle plan. He looked at the city with all the high and intimidating walls, realizing that in spite of those walls, the task was to take down that city, a rather daunting task. While in this state of mind, thinking deeply, planning carefully, he encountered a man with a sword in his hand. This is found in Joshua 5:13. He said, "And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us or for our adversaries?" Now, I want you to think about this. First of all, the phrase that said he lifted up his eyes indicates an element of a surprise. Then Joshua immediately went to him, and I want to tell you, this reveals a great deal of courage, doesn't it? He approached the man with a sword and asked a question, and this conveys the thought that Joshua recognized him as God and knew that he was being protected by the God of Israel. The fact that Joshua didn't draw his sword, to me, indicates that he supposed that if this man was looking for a fight, he would already have attacked. Then when Joshua asked him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" he received what I am sure was an unexpected reply. The man replied, "No." In other words, neither. Are you for us or for them? Neither. Wait a minute. But he said, "As commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Now, I would like us to look at this response from a couple of different perspectives. First of all, Joshua could have been upset by the remarks of this man with the drawn sword. After all, God had just put Joshua in control. Or so he thought. Then, let's look at the commander's answer to Joshua. Basically, he said, "I am neither for you nor for your adversaries." And I know what you're thinking. How could that be? This response must have made, at least it would have made me question, just who is he? Because if it was God, he certainly would have been for Israel. But let me assure you of this one thing, and I want you to hear this clearly, that when God comes on the scene, he does not come to take sides. He comes to take over. I want you to get that. So our question is not whether God is on our side, but whether or not we are on his side, because he takes over. It's an absolutely necessary thing as we face many battles, physical, emotional, or spiritual, that we make sure we are on the Lord's side. I believe that the lesson we need to learn from Joshua's encounter here is that Joshua understood that Israel would not be going into the battle alone. And I want to tell you, neither do you, because God has said, "Lo, I'm with you always." But then I want to call your attention to Joshua 8:1, where God said, "Do not be afraid, nor dismayed. Take all the people of war with you and arise, go up to Ai, see, and I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land." And I want to call to your attention the fact that when God spoke this, when he made that statement, he made it in the past perfect tense. In other words, as if it had already happened. I want you to think about that. I can tell you today that it bothers me that we as Christians are losing some of the battles as we go through this life. But then I remember having read the final chapter, and it tells us that eventually we win, and it tells us that emphatically. We may lose a few battles along the way, but the Lord has already won the war, and we are with him. So as long as we're on his side, we're going to win. Now, let me say that not only is a battle won by remembering who is in command, but it is also won by remembering that God's methods are not the same as man's methods, but God's methods are always right. And I think this is harder for some people to take than others, because we get some ideas in our mind of how God should do things, and we try to tell him how to do them. And when he doesn't, we get upset. Well, as a man responsible for the military strategy that would bring down the city of Jericho, I am sure that Joshua thought the word he received from the Lord to be very strange. Verses 3-5 instructed Israel to march around Jericho once each day for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times. When they'd completed the 7th circuit on that 7th day, the priests were to blow the trumpets with a long blast, and then all the people were to shout with a long shout. And that is all they had to do. God would do the rest. Now, if you look at that from the purely human side or the realistic side, you're going to say, well, that can't happen because that city has 2 great high walls and they're going to march around them and they're going to fall. Those walls have been standing for no telling how many years. Well, I want to tell you, when they marched around the 7th time on that 7th day and the priest blew the trumpet and the people shouted and they shouted long, it says the Bible tells us that the walls of that city, both of them, the inner wall and the outer wall, fell down flat. And the people were to go, every man straight before him into that city. Have you ever wondered what the people of Israel were thinking as they marched around the city? As for me, I suspect that they were becoming more and more convinced that they couldn't conquer Jericho unless God gave it to them. And remember that Jericho's walls were high and in fact had an inner and outer, both of which were very high. The gates were massive and they were securely shut. Each circling of the walls must have advanced the realization that without God there would be no victory. That needs to settle into our minds, especially here in the United States of America today, that without God in the picture, there will be no victory. Some of you may be able to recall the old spiritual song that says, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. You know what? The words to that song are actually not correct. God fought the battle of Jericho, not Joshua. But since Israel only marches and shouts, there's no doubt that God knocked down the walls of Jericho. God sometimes sets our contributions on the sidelines so that others can see that it's God doing it. 2 Corinthians 4:7 says that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. Yes, God's methods are not man's methods, but God's methods are always right. Now let's look at principle number 3. The best way to hear from God is to be quiet. Oh my. Do you know how hard it is sometimes for parents to make children be quiet? Because the children can't hear them unless they're quiet. Remember that Joshua instructed the people that they were to remain silent until they heard the long blast on the ram's horns, and then they were to shout. There were several scriptures which tell us that the best way to hear from God is to be quiet. Exodus 14:13 says, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. And that phrase, stand still, comes from the Hebrew language, and it can include the phrase, be still in word as in moment. Looking at the above verse, Joshua was actually telling Israel, don't be afraid, stand still, just be quiet, so that you can clearly see and hear what God is doing. Oh, how many of us need to sometimes just be still and let God talk to us. Be still and be quiet. Again, Exodus 14:14 says, the Lord will fight for you and you shall hold your peace. Oh, be still and be quiet. Isn't that amazing? Well, in Psalms 46:10-11, the Bible says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted above in the earth, and the Lord of hosts, He is us. He is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. Let's look at the principle number 4. Victory is ours if we don't quit. Joshua 6:16 says, and the 7th time it happened when the priest blew the trumpets that Joseph said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. So the people, now I want to tell you, they were standing there between 2 very tall walls. And he said, the Lord has given you the city. So the people shouted when the priests blew down the trumpets. And it happened that the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, so that the wall fell down flat. Then the people went into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. Then the writer of the Hebrews reminds us, but by faith the walls of Jericho fell after the people march around them for 7 days. What is it that honors God and pleases God the most? I want to tell you, it's your obedience. Listen to what 1 Samuel 15:22 tells us. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than to sacrifice, and to heed better than the fat of rams. So I want to tell you, sometimes we just need to ask God for answers, and when his answer is not exactly what we're looking for, we don't want to just give up, because that's what we normally want to do. If it didn't happen like we thought it should, we give up. But our victory is found in obediently persevering. In other words, never giving up. Let's look at principle number 5. Don't be fooled. A day of judgment is coming. As we look on in this account of Jericho, we read in verse 17, now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction, and all who are in it. Verse 21 adds, and they were utterly destroyed, all that was in the city, with the edge of the sword. The worship of the Canaanites included the sacrifice of children to the god of Moloch, the sexual perversion of prostitutes in the worship of Ashtaroth, and the use of magic and sorcery. The people of Jericho have been given the same opportunities as Rahab with her family. They refused and turned down every opportunity. You may not have stopped to think about it, but they've had their 4 generations just as God had promised. Genesis 15:16 said, but in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Think of that. Well, now after years of increasing in wickedness, the time for judgment has come. The time for judgment will come for all believers in this present age also. There has always been, and there will always be, those who just reject the grace and mercy of God. Let's take just a moment here and review these 5 principles. We all need to understand that God's plan for our success is better than ours. And the battle is won by remembering who is in charge. Second, God's methods may not be man's methods, but God's methods are always right, every time. The best way to hear God, be quiet. The victory is ours if we don't give up. And don't be fooled, there is a day of judgment coming. For every unsaved person in the world, they're going to stand before God and be judged and sent to hell. Even for the children of God, there's a judgment coming. We'll stand before him to receive the gifts that we have earned by living for him. Let me read you verse 24:15 of Joshua. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. God bless you. I hope this message challenges you.